Good evening, everyone. This is Alex with the Regional Technology Partnership. Want to thank you all for being with us today. My guest panelists, Ron, John, if you guys could just turn off your cameras and make sure you're muted for the opening remarks. Appreciate that so I can share my screen. Perfect. So thank you everybody for being with us today. Greatly appreciate your attendance. Really excited to hear, sorry, getting an error message about our YouTube streaming here. Really excited to hear our presenters today talking about cybersecurity and how things have changed with everything going on in the world recently. Before we get into that and I introduce Dr. Rob Totterdale, I am going to just go through some general notes and announcements. So I'm going to quickly share my screen. Let's see here. Guess I'm going with my whole screen. Cool, and hopefully you should all be able to see my deck. So I will go ahead and start that. Excellent. All right, so I am Alex Allen. I am the president of the Regional Technology Partnership. I know we have quite a few new attendees for this event today. So in addition to my role as president of the Tech Partnership, I'm also co-founder of 239 Group, which is a Southwest Florida business. We run a co-working space. We have a venture fund, and we're involved in quite a few different components of the technology ecosystem here. And I'm also the program director for a nonprofit mentoring group known as Fusion Point. If for any reason you need to reach me during the event, after the event, please feel free to email me at alex.allen@239group. We are utilizing a platform called Remo Conference. So this is probably most of your first time or first few times utilizing this platform. The reason that we use it is it does allow for networking before and after the presentation. During the presentation, you will have, so you should now have a panel on the right-hand side that says chat. Has participants listed and has a Q&A section. During the presentation, if you would like to submit a question, please feel free to do so. We'll keep an eye on that. You can also vote on other people's questions if that's something that you're interested to hear a response to make sure that one gets reacted to first. If during this presentation, as we add additional panelists up on the stage, you cannot hear one or more of the panelists, please go ahead and just refresh your browser. That does happen sometimes. Remo Conference is a new platform that's scaling fast because of COVID, so they're still working out some of the kinks. If you're having any issues, please make sure you're using Chrome. The software does work best on Chrome, and you can always jump out if you're on something else and jump in utilizing the Chrome browser. So some of our upcoming events. So the Regional Technology Partnership is involved with the Emerge Southwest Florida Virtual Expo, which is occurring next Thursday, June 25th from 10 to 12:30. This is really an event specifically geared towards getting local nonprofits, community organizations, and businesses networking again. So we will be utilizing this same platform. Each table will be representing an organization, and you will have the ability to come in and walk virtually from table to table and talk to the representative from those organizations. If you're interested to learn more, you can see the contact information here. You can go to swflvirtualexpo.com to learn more and to register. That's coming up next week. Also, upcoming events. So July 9th, the Southwest Florida Coder Group is running an event from 6:30 to 8:30, Development and Security Patterns. That is in conjunction with the local OWASP chapter, which is pretty cool seeing those groups collaborating. The Southwest Florida Data Group will be meeting July 6th from 6:30 to 7:30. All these, of course, are virtual. The WordPress group is meeting July 16th from 6:30 to 8 and is focusing on building blocks with advanced custom fields. And the Southwest Florida SEC group is doing their normal schedule and meeting July 21st, 6:30 to 7:30. And that topic is to be determined. The organizers of a lot of these groups are actually here in the audience. So Mike from Southwest Florida SEC, Daniel from the data group, Zarella from the coders group. So if you see their names after the event and you want to chat with them, please feel free to do so to learn more. I will be happy to answer any questions that I can. Moving along. So really excited to announce that through it all, we will still this year run our annual technology awards. So August 6th, 2020, save the date. We're about to post our event up on the website. We will be running our awards ceremony. We have a great guest speaker, Jeffrey Hazlett. So he has written multiple books. He's been the chief marketing officer for Kodak. He was a judge on The Celebrity Apprentice. He speaks on all kinds of news outlets on a regular basis. So really excited to have him present. And then as far as the actual awards, so this year we have a couple new awards. We will be presenting the Innovation Award, the Transformation Award, Leaders in Technology. Tech Startup of the Year is brand new. The Tech Student of the Year, and then Leader in Adversity during COVID-19 is obviously a new one. You can learn more about these awards and what each one represents at swfrtp.org/awards, and you can just click on any of the titles there on that page and submit your nomination. You can nominate yourself or someone else. If you're nominating someone else, please provide as much information as you can, and we will reach out to them to fill in any of the gaps that we need to. Big thank you to our corporate members. Obviously, we wouldn't be able to do these things as a nonprofit without your support. So take a moment to thank all of them. Also, a big special thank you to Inceptus as one of our panelists today. So thank you very much for that. And then, so who are we? Again, for those that are not familiar with the organization, so we are a nonprofit org. Our mission is to encourage the development, growth, and attraction of technology companies and resources to SWFL. And what do we do? So we run monthly tech talks. We have our annual awards. We run a tech match event for connecting talent with local organizations. We run a lot of special events. We put a tech newsletter out on a regular basis. So we do all that, and we do it because we love and believe in Southwest Florida. We are a nonprofit full of volunteer members, and we need your support. So for anybody that's out there that is not currently a member that enjoys our events on a regular basis, we would greatly appreciate if you could join at the individual membership level, which is just $75 a year or 20 cents a day. If you're interested in joining at the corporate level, we would love to have you at a level just starting at $500 and increasing from there. You can sign up right on our website at swfrtp.org, or you can email us at membership@swfrtp.org for more information. And then without further ado, I am going to hand this back over to Dr. Rob Totterdale. He can introduce our panelists.
Okay, I'm back. Well, I'd like to also welcome everyone to the panel discussion that we're having for this evening. As hopefully you noticed in the announcement, our intent here is really twofold. One is to kind of talk about some of the issues and threats in the cybersecurity space, which, given the current business and environment, has become quite a bit more risky for virtually everybody. So we want to talk about that, talk about how people should and could respond to that. We've got one of our panelists this evening. Actually, all of our panelists have had some experience along these lines. We'll be able to comment on different approaches we're dealing with some of the risks that we face today. Secondly, we want to talk some about a statewide organization that some of you may be familiar with, others not. It's called Cyber Florida. And we have one of the directors from a director from Cyber Florida with us, Ron Sanders, and he'll be talking about what the organization is doing. It's really trying to kind of ramp up its impact, not only throughout the state, but nationally. And there's a lot of interesting things that they're doing and have been doing. And at FGCU, where I've been a professor for the last 9 years, we've actually been able to leverage their capabilities through grants, getting us funding to set up cyber labs, giving us funding to help do community outreach programs, Cyber Academy that we did last year, and so on. So lots of great capabilities they've got. It's going to talk about that. And one of the newer programs deals with K through 12 education, where the state's actually going to try to really kind of get started very early in helping develop the cyber skills that we desperately need, not only in the state of Florida, but around the country. So those are kind of the two key things that we'll be doing this evening. The panelists that we have, and I'm going to let each of them kind of introduce themselves in a moment. They include Ralph Quarles, who's working with Wells Fargo, John Schlager, who Alex mentioned, is the CEO of Inceptus, and also one of our sponsors for the Southwest Florida Regional Technology Partnership, and Dr. Ron Sanders from Cyber Florida. We actually had intended to have another person on the panel this evening. Unfortunately, he was unable to attend with us. But the good news is Dr. Sanders is fully aware of the things that we were going to have Lewis talk about. And I've actually worked a good bit with Cyber Florida over the past 4 or 5 years, so I can cover some of those things as well. So those are the panelists. Myself, I'm actually a recently retired professor at Florida Gulf Coast University in the Electric College of Business. I've taught there for 9 years. I've developed courses in cybersecurity and forensics. I've actually implemented a cyber lab and a digital forensics lab in the past couple of years, and taught a number of other courses in the CIS curriculum. Prior to FGCU, I spent 28 years with a global consulting firm named Accenture. Did a lot of work with large corporations around the world implementing enterprise systems like SAP and Oracle and PeopleSoft and. I've had a lot of experience in a variety of industries, and I've also done, back at the university, I've done some research in the security area as well. So that's pretty much it for my background. So why don't we get the other panelists up here on the stage, and have each one of them kind of talk about their backgrounds a little bit. And why don't we start with Ralph, if you could turn your camera and your mic on.
Get my mic to come on. There we go. So, hello everyone, Ralph Quarles. I like to say that I retire well, I just don't stay that way. So I am working full-time with Wells Fargo these days, conducting cybersecurity and physical security assessments. Used to be in person, not so much anymore. I'll talk about that some. Also have 20 years in the Navy during the time of emergence of information warfare and electronic warfare, testing systems for the Navy. And then another career in corporate and another career in the intelligence community. So a wide background that may fit many of you in your questions. But tonight I'll be speaking to adapting to telecommuting, some of the particular threats. I work as a full-time telecommuter anyway, virus aside, but certainly now. And I'm still conducting assessments every day, so I can talk to you about all the different companies I'm talking to and how they're adapting to this crisis, from large to small, and then also speak to some things I didn't know during these times for new opportunities. Thanks, Rob.
Okay. John, can you activate your camera and your mic?
There we go.
You're on.
All right. Hi, how are you guys doing? I'm John Schlager. I've been in security for 20 plus years now. You know, I started my career, I worked for a company networking. It was one of the first application service providers back in the mid 90s. We kind of invented software as a service, essentially. We got bought by AT&T, so anything AT&T managed services comes from USI. So after that, I was at the EPA. I worked for the Criminal Investigation Division. I was their information security officer, helping them secure those infrastructures, but also, you know, I help with agents and, you know, doing forensic investigations, helping design their labs, those types of things as well. After that, I went to work for Booz Allen Hamilton. I was a consultant there for many years, mostly within the National Security Agency. I worked on both sides of the house there back then before U.S. Cyber Command was out. It was Information Assurance Directorate, as well as, you know, signal intelligence, just more around electronic data gathering and those types of activities. But there I work mostly with a team of threat hunters, essentially, advanced persistent threats, trying to find foreign nation states and federated data stores, you know, our defense industrial base, looking for bad guys, essentially, you know, foreign nation states mostly. After that, I went to work for the U.S. Capitol Police. I was their chief information security officer, took a failing program, 16,000 open audit items, and closed it in less than a year. So, I mean, it was a pretty big uplift, but it was taking something that I've learned over the years to kind of come up with a process to help secure and you know, make more mature, you know, customers' security programs. So, you know, after that, I started a company, myself and a couple partners, one who's on here as well, Lee Noriega. We started Scout Cybersecurity. I was a co-founder there. It's a managed security service provider, so an MSSP, and I'm sure we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. But, you know, we help businesses, you know, because of the whole people arbitrage problem, and why Cyber Florida is around is there's not enough talented or trained cyber professionals to do the work that we have now. You know, so our goal is to help people who are making widgets make widgets while we control their security programs. So that's where Inceptus is born out of, is trying to help those businesses deal with cyber threats and, you know, new and innovative ways to stop bad guys, you know, and threats tomorrow aren't the same as threats today. So it's a constantly evolving landscape. So we got to be operationally effective and be able to be agile. And I think that's something that hasn't happened, that needs to happen to specifically combat, you know, advanced persistent threats and those sorts of things. I don't know if you guys just saw too, CIA tools are out there now. So here comes another wave of new attacks based on, you know, intelligence community tool sets. So thank you guys.
Rob, I can't hear you. You're on mute, but I read your lips, so I'm going to go ahead and start my introduction. Like Rob and at least one of our other panelists, I'm about to fail retirement for the third time. As Rob suggested, I am the staff director for the Florida Center for Cybersecurity, aka Cyber Florida. I work for the executive director, a guy named Mike McConnell, who used to head the National Security Agency, was vice chair of Booz Allen, and also the nation's second director of national intelligence. I've worked for Mike in most of those capacities. And when he was named executive director of Cyber Florida, I was about to step down as head of USF School of Public Affairs, and he convinced me to unretire and join him. We'll talk more about Cyber Florida later on in the show. Just very quickly, my background, I've been in academia, I've been in the private sector. I spent most of my professional life in the federal government, almost 40 years. I am not a technical person. I am an HR guy. But my specialty for about 3/4 of those 40 years has been spies and cybersecurity ninjas. So about 2 decades in the Defense Department, and about a decade in the intelligence community. And in between, I worked at a central management agency and also at everybody's favorite government agency, the Internal Revenue Service. I'm here to tell you that if you're ever at a crowded party and you want a little personal space, just telling you work for the IRS, and suddenly there's an empty circle about 20 feet in diameter around you. You can breathe easy. I left government in 2010 from the intelligence community. I still hold a clearance. I'm still on the NSA advisory board with Mike McConnell, and I also consult with DHS on their cyber workforce stuff. In Booz Allen, I ran their cyber human capital practice as well as their wargaming and simulation practice. You may wonder what the heck do those two have anything to do with one another, and there's actually quite a bit of crosswalk between them. We can talk about that during the program. I left Booz Allen, thought I retired to Florida, got roped into running the School of Public Affairs for 3 years. I just stepped down, and I've been staff director of Cyber Florida now for about 10 days. So, however, as Rob suggested, I've been on the Cyber Florida advisory board since its inception, and I'll even claim a little bit of responsibility helping to write its initial authorizing legislation with Tallahassee, in part because I am a USF graduate myself. I graduated before most of the people on this program were born, and that's all I'm going to tell you. Otherwise, I'd have to kill you. Over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Ron. Okay, so we're past the introductions. What I'd like to do is provide a little bit of context. Obviously, everybody on this call has been impacted by the coronavirus and the kind of the impacts that kind of follow from that, be that working from home, not working, loss of jobs, a whole myriad of things. And in addition to that, clearly the impacts of potential security breaches, and attacks from a whole host of different sources, not only here in the United States but also from around the world. So I wanted to provide a little bit of a context, and I've got just 2 slides that I want to share with you. And if you can kind of bear with me for a moment, hopefully I can pull those up. And let me get back to that. And I'm hoping everybody can see the list of documents that I've got. And let me check back here if it's visible on the screen. Yes, it should be. And I think if you click on the actual image, it will get a little bit larger for you. But these documents, a couple PowerPoints and a couple of others are available to you. You can download these, and I'll kind of show you how you can do that in a moment or two. But we have things here like the bios of the different panel members. I've got my 2-slide presentation. I also have a document I put together of cybersecurity resource sites, and this deals with some of the topics we'll discuss this evening, ranging from the impact on different industries, the impacts on individuals, impacts on education, and so on. And so it kind of goes through probably 7 or 8 different sources, gives you some additional links to sites that you can go out and gather that information, kind of review it when you have a few moments. But to get started, I'd actually gone through and thought, well, let's take a look at what's actually happening out there from an industry standpoint. And Ralph will talk a little bit about, or a lot more about, some of the banking implications. But as you might expect, everybody's kind of gone virtual. So the activities that are taking place, the volumes of those activities have gone up substantially. And in the banking industry, there's been over 50% increase in mobile banking, and that stat came from the FBI. In education, I assume we have a few students here, maybe some alumni, but pretty much all the high schools, all the colleges, everybody has gone virtual. And depending on who you talk to, it's gone well or it's gone poorly. But we've got a lot of colleges and a lot of the K through 12 that have gone to an online type delivery method. In around the United States, that's over 1,100 colleges with 14 million students that have now kind of been turned loose and to access their education in an online environment. globally, 1.38 billion students have been impacted by this. So we've really done a major transformation at breakneck speed. I think faculty were probably given 3 to 5 days to get themselves together and become virtual. So that leaves a lot of vulnerabilities and exposure as the whole educational system basically went into an online mode. And the word on the top of the part of the presentation says this a COVID-19 world and beyond. So the things that we see in terms of increased volumes, increased activities, transformation of industries, they're not all going to stay that way, but very likely there's going to be some permanent increase that will be impacted in many of these areas. In healthcare, 4,340% increase in telehealth claims. That actually should read claim line items, so it's not as impressive as it might be. But in any case, there's been a major transformation of folks seeing the doctors now virtually, which again increases vulnerabilities, increases risk, increases potential problems with data privacy and data loss. E-commerce, if you're like me, you may have done some takeout orders. You've certainly used Amazon and some other sources, 49% increase. So that's a pretty large increase in the volume. Working from home, if you were fortunate to keep your position with the employer that you had, a lot of folks had the ability to work from home. The faculty and the colleges, they were able to work from home and deliver their coursework and exams and evaluations and whatnot online. And the other statistic there that's interesting, 60 to 65% working from home, at least part-time. The more interesting one is that, even in the past, a number of people were able to work from home, but there's been an over 17% increase in the ones that are actually working 5 days or more per week. Cyber skills shortage, I think that's been mentioned. And yes, there has been a shortage in cyber skills prior to COVID-19. DHS suggests that there's been a 65% increase in demand for cyber skills. And that's based on a 2 million shortfall of skills back in 2019, cited by Gartner. So as you can see, pretty much across industry, and we could talk about retail, we could talk about wholesale distribution, you could pretty much pick an industry, hospitality, they've all been dramatically impacted, either moving folks to work from home or loss of jobs. And with that, a substantial increase in technology, things like the tool that we're using this evening for this session. The other information I just wanted to provide real quickly deals with some other information I thought would be interesting. The attack pattern. Microsoft found that there was back earlier on, there was 1 million per day of COVID-themed attacks. And now, interestingly enough, that has declined pretty dramatically now to only about 100,000. But on the flip side, the overall attack pattern has gone up, where they're seeing 12 million attacks per day, which is a 20% increase from February. So the environment that we live in, there's an ongoing series of attacks and breaches that take place. A significant number of increases have taken place since coronavirus. And likely these will continue as we've gone to this work from home type of situation. VMware reports 238% attack increase. Security management says that 70% of organizations intend to increase their cyber spending in the next year. That's actually a little contrary to some of the information you see on what IT organizations are spending, but nevertheless, I think people kind of get it that there's some issues and they need to be more proactive in how they address their security position. World Economic Forum, attacks are shifting due to the work patterns. Cisco's indicating they believe 94% will be in the cloud by 2021. And then another kind of interesting and scary piece of information from Symantec with the Internet of Things, which is obviously in your home and in business. There's a lot of additional things being attached to the internet. 55% of the Internet of Things use a password of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I thought that was a kind of a startling piece of information. So at any rate, That's kind of the background, and what I'd like to do now is kind of transition back to the actual panels, and kind of with that as the context. The first question I kind of have for the panelists is what are they seeing in terms of risks and threats in the marketplace? And Ralph, why don't we start with you?
Sure, I'll weigh in on that. I tell you, the interesting thing about this, the old saw about the more things change, the more they stay the same, is certainly true right now. When it comes down to the risk and threats you're facing, they take a new flavor, but I'm not really sure that I would claim that they're brand new and different per se. For instance, if I want something from you and I'm going to attempt social engineering, I should probably try for a tact of sounding like something you're concerned about right now. And I would try to make that a time sensitive thing to create a false sense of urgency. Well, if you think about the times right now, that just makes it easier for social engineering. There's already a sense of urgency. There's already an event worldwide occurring that you're very concerned about. So it creates a lever. Hence, as Rob mentioned, the spike in phishing attempts that want to reference COVID. It's been happening since there's been an intranet. I'm sure the first ARPANET participants who emailed each other were going after something happening then, and it cycles over and over again. Some of the Hawksbuster websites will show you the old saws get recycled, and it's no less true now. The phishing things I'm seeing among the corporations we visit and the people we check for assessments are, of course, focusing on the whether it's the COVID-19 concerns, the payments coming in from the government and pretending to be someone trying to check that. The latest you've seen on the media calling nurses stations and pretending to be contacting patients who are waiting on the results and wanting personal information. And yet the answers to these has not changed either. If you wouldn't give personal information out before, now is certainly not the time to begin doing it. If you wouldn't practice unsafe computing practices before, now is not the time to cut corners. And yet the sense of urgency and the need for continuity of ops seems to be driving a lot of businesses. I guess the overall trend I'm seeing is a push to say, oh my gosh, we got to keep business going. Just do something, guys. We're going to be working remotely. Let's just go do it. Here's a computer, run away. And you'd be surprised how many companies are doing just that without a recourse to any standard documented procedures. They're just running off trying to make things happen in the good name of, we need to keep business going. We got to put food on the table. We got to get revenue in. We got to provide the services we promised. All of that. I spent about 10 years of my life with an operational slogan, as we like to say, of we will help you do the most gosh awful dangerous thing with the most sophisticated sensitive equipment in a place in the world you absolutely don't want to take it, as safe as you can. And that's kind of what we're all doing now. We're running off into the field, carrying our equipment under our arms from the company offices and trying to do the best we can. And I see that happening in all sorts of ways. And I feel like the best we can do is, as cybersecurity professionals particularly, is to try to help people do that in a balance that somewhere between just do anything and do it so safely that you don't get anything done. So I'm seeing the same trends of the same things, just with a new coat of paint on top of them. Just like when the Admiral visits the ship, it's nobody chipped the paint away, but we're doing a new coat of paint on everything with a new flavor of COVID or government returns or some other kind of pretend nonsense, communication to make people think that we're responding to real threats that are out there. And yet people are just trying to fool you the same old ways. It's still, unfortunately, what we used to call the organic connection to the computer. It's that person in the chair who needs to be careful. And that's the biggest urging I could give.
Ralph, in terms of what you're seeing or just observations, you say it's kind of like the paint, the same old paint job. Are we seeing a lot more paint jobs happening?
Well, I think it's a shift in scale. A company used to be able to feel pretty good about their sensitive information and materials and equipment if they were sitting inside the multi-layered castle defense kind of classic, you know, you got a badge to get in, you got a badge to get in the secure area, the servers are behind extra protections. For that old traditional company mindset of I'm safe because I've got a moat and castle walls and a drawbridge and archers, not so much anymore. You just sent the guy to camp in the woods with his laptop. So in the times when I've been on the other side of the fence, it's all about the avenues of attack. What are you making available to me? And what we've made available in recent months are lots of individual employees working in individual enclaves. And that's where I see the rise is the attacks on remote access, especially with faster speed internet that will actually let you sit there and have a bigger pipe to go attack the home system. And it probably has more information because the person's now working from home and he's in a hurry to get things done. So he might move over to his personal phone and send that personal email that he wouldn't have thought about doing if he's sitting in the middle of the office with people watching. That's what I see a rise in, is the bleed over between home and business systems and the bleed out rather, of not sitting behind the gate anymore. You know, you don't have the same controls at home.
John?
Yeah, with COVID, the game really is kind of the same from an attacker perspective. They're still going after the same data. You're still doing business. Just the chips have been changed a lot, chess-wise. There's been a complete change and move to remote work and to cloud migrations and all these types of things. So COVID has kind of spurred something that was already in need. We've already been doing cloud transformations for years. Companies kind of have come back. It's been hemming and hawing a little bit now, but COVID has kind of forced that game now. So, a lot of those chips and how they've fallen out, remote work and, the game has changed a lot. So now you have a lot of remote workers coming in. So the risk kind of has changed. And a lot of companies have already had problems, addressing risk within their own organizations already before this. Now their architectures and their ecosystems have to change to adapt to help with these, remote workers. Some of our customers that I've been talking to might not go back to normal operations after this. It may save them a ton of money with this. Everybody seems to be just as effective as they were before this, so it's kind of spurred that change. But, I think when all this started, for the first 2 weeks, kind of everybody kind of thought it was, a little vacation-y. It sounds horrible to say that, but it didn't really set in till about a month later. We saw a lot of customers scrambling, trying to figure out how that they were going to do this remote work capability, and stay secure. Because, with rapid evolution, creates great risk within organizations. You're rapidly evolving to meet this new need now. Maybe it wasn't something that was on your radar before. So you throw something together really quickly. And, we've seen this over time, and, Zoom is one of them as well. A rapid adopted, platform to do video teleconferencing. Now, all of a sudden, all these risks are coming out that you may not have known of. So, I think COVID has really mixed up, cyber essentially, because now also from that perspective, you have all these out of work people, have all of these, people around the world now that are stuck in their houses and, idle hands do the devil's work, or deprivation breeds motivation. There's all these different adages that actually are going to come true. We have this new, like Ralph was saying, rapid expansion of, internet speeds and connectivity, to our home users. So these types of attacks are only going to be amplified. Mix this with tools that are being hacked from, intelligence, sites and intelligence groups and, commercial off-the-shelf tools being readily available. And these attacks are, kind of migrating and amplifying. So that's why we're seeing a large attack and pivoting to easier things. A lot of the larger corporations have already tackled this type of stuff too. So, we're seeing this merge now with third-party due diligence and all these types of things too that are going to change as well. So all of these ways that we've been measuring organizations before may not have even, looked at remote work, at all in their risk and adoption. So, COVID vulnerabilities, risks, increases. It's it's just the same thing over and over again, and we mix this with, people arbitrage, and now we have a pandemic. We call it a digital pandemic now. So, I mean, people are in a rush. And, one thing that I would have to say is slow down a little bit, even though you kind of can't, but make sure that what we're putting into these organizations are secure. So,
Okay, so John, as a managed security services provider, you're kind of like the IT security group within an organization. You're providing that service. So, how has this impacted what you do? Has this dramatically increased the amount of work and service you have to provide for companies?
Well, I mean, kind of yes and no. We have been trying to force this hand for a while, especially with some of our customer base. We've seen this migration to remote work as a thing now, to answer a lot of problems, not just, COVID-19, just like I said, force the hand, like, traffic and, urban sprawl and all these types of things. They're not really necessary anymore. We can work remotely now and do it safely, securely, and still be as productive, if not more. So a lot of our customers are, being, like I said, forced to do these migrations, but, we're able to help them, with those risks that are going to arise with that type of stuff. So.
Okay, Ron, any comments?
This may be a bit contrarian. I don't know, but I do think the world has changed. I do think we'll look back on this and say this is an inflection point. And while the tools and the attacks may look the same, I think it's become a far more target-rich environment. So to me, what's really happening, and frankly, I'll give some gratuitous advice to those who work for companies out there listening. Suddenly, we've got a new normal. It's life online, and there are a whole lot of newborns, not digital natives, who are working online. They're playing online, they're shopping online, they're checking out library books online, they're doing everything online, and most of them have never done that before. And so it's made, as I said, it's become a target-rich environment, and it's in many respects the Wild West. Stimulus checks go out to millions of Americans. There are an almost the same number of cyber criminals who are willing to help relieve you of those stimulus checks. And they've got all sorts of scams, fake tests, fake results, give me your HIPAA information, do this, do that. And they're all dealing with people who are not digital natives, who are not used to cyber hygiene. And I'll expand it even further, because it's not just the sort of classic spear phishing or social engineering attack where somebody's trying to get into your system. There are influence operations out there now that are attempting to sway public opinion with a small p, and in some cases, a large P political agenda. Cyber Florida has just funded a grant for 2 scholars to look at the incidence of mis and disinformation on COVID-19. Misinformation being just dumb stuff that people either originate or pass on out of ignorance. But disinformation is deliberately planted. And by the way, and these researchers won't be the first to conclude this, so much of this, maybe the vast majority of it, is not generated even by humans. It's generated by bots, by criminal organizations, by state actors, by non-state actors, by just people who want to. And again, they're reaching out to people who aren't used to that, who may actually believe some of the stuff they're reading, and they respond accordingly. So they make themselves far more vulnerable to spear phishing attacks. They make themselves far more vulnerable to social engineering. They make themselves far more vulnerable to influence operations that are indirect in nature. So to me, while the tools may be the same, many more targets and many more ways to attack those targets. We've gone from, for example, we spend a lot of time at Cyber Florida worrying about how citizens are dealing with COVID-19 and responding to lots of mis and disinformation that may result in successful spear phishing attacks, and trying to teach citizens how to respond, how not to open attachments. So my gratuitous advice to the companies out there is, while most of us have focused on teaching our employees not to do dumb things. A friend of mine, actually, I'll use his name in vain because it's worth the group knowing him if you don't. John Felker, who is the assistant director for integrated operations at DHS's new cybersecurity and infrastructure at CISA agency. They're cybersecurity ninjas. And John likes to say 80 or 90% of intrusions are the result of stupid user tricks. I'm not sure I refer to folks that way because I may be one of them. But it's folks who aren't used to practicing good cyber hygiene suddenly finding that they're having to buy their groceries online, or their kids are having to go to school online, and they don't take the appropriate protections and precautions. And so, to belabor the point, there's a whole lot more of what's going on. The inflection point to me is I don't think we're going to go back to a world that is more physical than cybernetic. I think I've seen so many businesses who are failed, in part driven by COVID-19, but frankly, I think COVID-19 has just accelerated a trend that we've probably all seen. Vacant malls, both big and strip malls, more shopping online, less people shopping on, in stores. I even did a study for the Army a couple of years ago about recruiting, recruiting in strip malls versus recruiting online. And I wish I could report success in convincing the Army to do more online and less in strip malls, but I'm afraid I can't. So I think the new normal here with lots of newborns is going to be life online. And I think businesses, local governments, federal agencies, even nonprofits and NGOs are going to find themselves having to spend more time teaching the consumers of their products and services how to identify and deal with fake news, spear phishing attacks, all of the other pathologies, social engineering and otherwise, that people face. And whether they'll be successful or not remains to be seen. Kate Whitaker, who is part of the audience, she's our Director of Communications and Outreach. She and I have even talked about partnering with AARP because so many of the people who are vulnerable, those non-digital, non-natives, if you will, are elderly, and they're simply not used to the kinds of sophisticated attacks that most of us are used to seeing every day, particularly from state actors. So again, I think we're at an inflection point, new targets, old tools, new targets, and a new way of life.
Okay. Yeah. So Ron, you touched on really the teaching and education aspects as being really critical, and that's up and down the line from younger folks to older folks. Maybe go back to Ralph and kind of revisit this from a standpoint of what else do companies and individuals do, or should they do, to help prevent breaches, to help prevent data loss. Clearly, getting people educated, getting folks informed about what some of the risks are. That's easier said than done. Even at the university, we have programs of, don't click on this, don't click on that. Here's some things you should do from a hygiene standpoint. So, but what other types of things should companies and organizations and individuals be thinking about, or types of actions that people need to take in order to really kind of shore up the defenses?
Well, I know for those sitting out there in this group, it may be easy to get into kind of a doom and gloom mentality of, oh my gosh, these guys are painting an awful picture. I'm scared to open my email now. But I would like to offer a bit of good news from what I'm seeing as a best practice of companies right now in the midst of this mess. And that is, the best of these are doing something that I used to see often in my military career and in my career with the CIA, which was, we used to say that every really good policy was only because something horrible happened, and people had to go back and address it and look at it and take lessons learned. And that's kind of what I see happening in a good way right now. Is the most thoughtful of the companies, from the smallest one of less than a dozen that I just reviewed, to the ones with hundreds of thousands that I reviewed a few weeks ago, are taking this not just as a daunting challenge, but as an opportunity to rethink how they work and go dig out that dusty old or non-existent policy that set down reasonable guidelines and make sure that, oh my gosh, this is some horrible boilerplate that we created just so people like Ralph Quarles could come assess us for their company because we're a regulated industry. And we've all read those things if you work for any sort of company. They read terribly, they're unenforceable, they don't make sense, and they read like someone scanned the internet for incident management policy and took whatever came up and made it their own. Actually, I've reviewed a few of those, and sometimes they don't even bother to change the names. So what I see the best companies doing now, though, is thinking maybe we can do this differently. People need to work remotely, and they won't be present at the company for us to offer them a way to do consistent, good, solid cyber hygiene, reasonable practices that they can actually do and understand as laypersons who, as Ron mentioned, are new to this. So I've seen some really amazingly well-written policies lately, and I review an awful lot of them. It's a big part of my job. So I've seen an awful lot of cruddy ones in the past, and that is one thing I'm starting to see that's a very good thing, whether you're a 2-person shop or a 20,000 person shop, to go back and visit some of these things at the point of need and say, we really need to get some good policy, and not just put out a torrent of emails addressing the patch on the wound that is having to suddenly make everyone work from home, but to put out some simple, easily understood, clear, practical direction that, oh, by the way, it also fulfills the need when assessors like myself come visiting for a real policy on these areas. And then you have something you can also carry forward and to stop and reasonably think about, well, what do we actually need for this, for people to work safely? What's the short list of tips? How do we word it in a way that the person brand new to it could actually do, and where are the best practices? I just put out on the general chat as a plug for my fellow panelist former place of employment, which he'll tell you is very odd for anyone from CIA to say, hey, go look at what the NSA is doing. It's a great idea. But it is. And besides, the CIA didn't put that stuff out on public things. But you'll see there's a list there of just good practical guides. Some a little hard to understand unless you are a server administrator, but some are very plain and easy to understand. And they include things like 10 things you can do to make your video conference more secure. As people found out of the box don't work for that. But it's not that hard to secure for all the media hype. Zoom's not that bad. It just needed some help. People needed to actually follow the practices. And that's a good fable for pretty much anything you're using. That laptop you hold is only as secure as you make it. As I often tell people, if you're going to do 2 things, have good access security and patch your silly piece of equipment within an inch of its life, and you'll go a long way, aside from every other policy. And those are the sort of things I'm seeing people do, writing policies that plainly say that, making practices and training for their employees. It's not a check in the box for compliance, but they're actually addressing it. Now, sure, the policies that don't address what we're doing now, yeah, those are still probably boilerplate and dusty, but at least the ones that you need right now are getting addressed a little better. And that's a very positive thing. This is a great spur to action, in my view. We used to say in the government that sadly, a tragedy is good for at least 5 years of decent funding to address the issues that should have been funded all along. That's kind of what we're doing now, isn't it?
Yep.
You really, really, really need to do this right to avoid problems. So now would be the time to actually pay some attention and get a standard way of doing this for the poor people who are having to do it for the first time. But that's a good thing I see. Most of the places I visit, heavily regulated industries, they service the banking industry, they're insurance companies, security related companies. So they've always had some kind of a compliance issue and compliance staff. But even for the little guys, like the company of less than a dozen that I just reviewed, they went back, took a round turn, as we used to say in the Navy, and thought, how do we really need to work? And they blew away their physical office, and they're completely virtual now, working off cloud services as though it was going to be their server on site. So it's like I enjoy telling people, cloud is not some scary bugaboo as long as you approach it the same way you would if it were a server you were going to house yourself. Do the same sorts of things, and that's what they did. So they're working very happily and said, yeah, replace that address. That's a mailbox. We never need to send someone there. And think, for a small company particularly, think of the money they're saving and the increased security.
Sure. Okay.
We, as attackers, we would look for avenues of attack. You don't have a physical place to go attack. You've already removed a few of those. So that's a very good thing happening now. Go back and look at what you're doing, formalize it, standardize it, make it plain language, and you've already cobbled together a really good plan for going forth from the future when all this subsides and we go back to a building or not.
Okay, great. John, maybe you could provide a few comments on how you're advising your customers, your clients. They're obviously dealing with these day in and day out, and you're kind of the first line of defense for them. Can you do your mic?
Yeah, that helps, right? So, yeah, we have been helping a lot of our customers. Let me start off by saying, a lot of these attacks and a lot of things that happen can be stopped by basic hygiene. What Ron was saying earlier, if people just do the stuff that's basic, a lot of these attacks wouldn't be successful. Keeping your patches up to date, stuff that we in the cyber world hear, over and over again. If you just did those simple things, a lot of these attacks would not be successful. So let me just start off by saying that. And also too, what Ralph was saying too, a lot of the GRC and regulation that's out there and what he takes companies and assesses them against, are born out of necessity. Cybersecurity is such an ethereal plane of existence. It's a ghostly thing that hardly, not too many people really understand that or what it means exactly. So, when you spending money in those areas, it's kind of hard to see anything because there's no real ROI on what you're spending your money on. It's not like you buy something, you get a return from that. It's just a vapid hole that you dump money into. And if your security team is doing what they're supposed to do, you shouldn't hear much from them. They're doing their job. Maybe you'll hear them, coming out and giving you reports about what they've seen, what they've been blocking, those types of things. But, these regulations were there to force people to do basic hygiene, and we're starting to see that too, the DoD with the DFARS and, the cybersecurity maturity model certification, trying to do third party, try to get the defense industrial base to follow basic hygiene, do the things that you need to do to secure your infrastructure. This goes back long before COVID even happened. Now, since that's happened, there's been a mix up and now an addition of a whole new set of things that need to be looked at that, this kind of is that genesis and that spur moment. When ransomware came out a few years ago, everybody was running around trying to figure out how we're going to fix this. All these boutique type, use your behavioral analytics software, for endpoint protection came out, and kind of solve that problem a little bit, but still that is not just the end all answer, So what's really nice too is that there's a lot of guidance that's out there and available. And, the class that you did last year, Rob, on that stuff is great. The NIST cybersecurity framework or the NIST CSF that came out is a way to measure your risk of your organization. It could be kind of complex, and a lot of that stuff, if you're a small business, is overwhelming, so do these types of things to measure your risk within your organization to really help reduce it over time. CIS, the Center for Internet Security, and their critical security controls is another way to look at things, looking at technologies that are out there and ways to block these attack vectors that are happening, and they really haven't changed that much. Everything's getting in through email gateways and web gateways pretty much, maybe on foot or, or something of that nature, or social engineering over the phone, wire transfers and stuff that kind of gets bucketed into cyber somehow. I've dealt with thousands of wire transfer cases, because of the email component, but, it's there's a lot of information out there for you. to follow those things. And, you know, a lot of our products and our solution sets and how we do things are based around these different programs, you know, NIST CSF, CIS critical security controls. These are baked into my product and portfolio of services, my protection plans that I bring to organizations, because, you know, they give you a way to measure that risk, show where your gaps are, and actually try to attack those gaps to, you know, maybe find something that you didn't know existed before to help secure that part. You know, COVID is that catalyst. You know, now it's forcing people to look at this again, you know, and look at their reevaluate. And it's such a great thing. It sounds horrible, I'm going to say this, but it's such a great thing to have a moment that makes people think. You know, I've seen that aha moment a lot. Like Ralph was saying about when attacks happen, you know, the faucets open up, magic money just comes out of nowhere, you know, to respond, you know, and, you know, what is it? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, you know? So you got to do these basic things, you know, to your organization to make sure that you're going to be more secure over time. You know, the game is going to change, and, you know, technologies are going to change, and the different, you know, types of technologies are going to change. But there's a base set of tools that are out there, you know, that can do the job, you know, and help and really, really reduce risk within your organization programmatically, security control wise across the board. So.
Okay, great. Okay, thanks, John. And for those of you who have an interest on the resources, materials we've made available, there's links out to Inceptus Secure's website, and there's John's got some good materials out there that kind of talk about the things they do, the service they offer. I'd encourage you to take a look at that, get a good understanding of what a managed security services provider does offer in the marketplace. We're probably running just a little bit late, so I think we have this scheduled till 7, but we actually can go a little bit longer. So what I'd like to do is have Ron talk a little bit about the Cyber Florida. Again, it's a great story. It's exciting, some of the things they're looking to get into or further get into in the future, and have him spend a few minutes kind of talking about that. And then you know, once he's done with that, we'll kind of jump into Q&A. So if you've got some questions, you can go ahead and enter some of those, and we'll come back to those here in a few moments. So with that, Ron, would you like to tell us about Cyber Florida and some of the cool stuff you guys are into?
And Rob, are you going to put the slides up from your end, or do you want me to?
I can. I think I can do that.
All right, and while you're doing it, just a couple of closing remarks on COVID-19. As Mike Rogers used to run NSA used to say, it's the wetware, it's the people, stupid. And I'm reminded, for those of you who are Jerry Seinfeld fans, I'm reminded of a question that George Costanza asked when he ran over a pigeon. Whose responsibility is it, mine or the pigeon's? I think in this case, we have to ask ourselves, for all of us, I'll include myself in this, who are new to the new normal, who are suddenly finding themselves living all of our lives more or less online, and who are now potential victims, never experienced a sophisticated social engineering attack, much less mis and disinformation that attempts to influence our behavior. Who's responsible for equipping us with the basic skills? One of the things I am going to talk about in Cyber Florida is how we're looking at the K-12 pipeline, not just to identify kids who've got STEM aptitude who could go into the cybersecurity field, but also to teach them basic hygiene, like washing your hands in a digital way, and even more importantly and more vexing, cyber citizenship. We all learned, I did, I know maybe Rob did too, we learned about all of this in high school civics. I think, at least in Florida, high school civics has gone the way of the dodo, more or less. And they certainly, kids aren't learning cyber hygiene and cyber citizenship from their teachers, other than in a few instances, those curricula don't exist. So where do they learn it? Like other forms of hygiene, back in the day, they learn it from their friends. That's probably not a good idea. So to close out the COVID-19 discussion, lots of people are asking, whose responsibility is it to teach these people new to life online the basic survival skills to avoid becoming a victim? And I will tell you, lots of local governments and nonprofits are saying, maybe it's us. I would ask those of you in business to think about whether maybe it's you. And I will tell you, Rob, if you would go to the next slide on our strategic plan, and I apologize if those of you are just seeing sort of the thumbnail version. You do have this as a read ahead, and you can access it through the link. But let me just say, the premise of Cyber Florida, its reason for being, stems from the fact that we have become so reliant on information and communications technology. It has become taken for granted, everything we do. COVID-19 has accentuated that and exasperated it, but we have become very reliant on it. And that brings the cyber criminals and the state actors and the non-state actors and hacktivists and everybody you can think of out of the woodwork for the Wild West. And we think Cyber Florida's mission, as chartered by the state, is threefold. Next slide, please. So we've got three missions. These were given to us by Tallahassee in 2013. Cyber Florida was actually stood up in 2014. But they have they deal with education, research, and community engagement. And what I'm going to do is cover each in a little bit of detail, but the bumper stickers are fairly straightforward. Part of this is making sure we have a cyber workforce that can fill all of the jobs that employers have to fill. And it's both public and private employers. It is in the state of Florida, and it is beyond. There are estimates that it's 500,000. I think that number understates. But there's a pipeline there that we'll talk about. Research, basic research, some cases not driven by profit or national defense, national security, just basic research as well as applied research. How can we spur that, particularly amongst Florida's 12 state universities? And as this will come as a shock to all of you listening, those 12 state universities don't necessarily play well together. There's a bit of intercollegiate rivalry. And when the scientific enterprise is built around collaboration and information sharing, that intercollegiate competition gets in the way. And then lastly, there's community engagement. We want to make Florida the most secure state, cyber secure state in the nation. And part of that is educating the public on things like cyber hygiene and cyber citizenship. Rob, next slide, please. So again, I apologize for the postage stamp view if that's what you're seeing. But under each of those three goals, we've got a couple of sub-goals. And I'm not going to cover them here because they're all repeated in the slides that follow. In the interest of time, we're going to move forward. But you can see that we've gone from very broad goals, a very broad mission statement and premise, to very specific goals around education, research, and engagement. And from that, this is what's new about this plan, some very specific initiatives that will drive us to achieve those goals and sub-goals. And what I'm going to do is share them. Again, you have this.
Just a quick.
Sorry, go ahead, Rob.
I think if you double click on the slide, it'll enlarge. So I think if folks double click on that slide, you can get it to enlarge or full screen. Ron, your mic's off.
Great. Hopefully, folks can expand it. I'm going to leave it so I can see my fellow panelists and you, Rob. That's partly to make sure they don't fall asleep on me. Why don't we go to the next slide? So let me spend a few seconds talking about education. The bumper sticker here is increasing the number of cyber professionals in the state available for state jobs as well as jobs outside Florida, in the nation and beyond. There is a pipeline here, though. You don't just decide you're going to be a cyber ninja when you're a senior in college or after you've been at work, although they're part of that pipeline too. We have a whole series of initiatives. I'm going to cover these in a bit more detail because Rob asked me to in a second, that deal with the K through 12 pipeline. We spent an hour yesterday with the State Department of Education talking with the commissioners of K through 12, the commissioner that deals with higher education, the commissioner that deals with adult education. We've got initiatives and we're working with them, local school districts and the state university system to increase that pipeline at every level. Rob, let me talk a little bit about K through 12 on the next slide, and we'll rush through this in the interest of time. K through 12 is one of our top priorities, in part because it's so decentralized, and we're hoping that with the state's help, we can develop a model curriculum that any teacher in any school district in the state can pull off the shelf. The good news is we got lots of teachers who have the aptitude for it. They teach math and science today. The bad news is that cybersecurity is off-putting. They're nervous about it. They're scared by it, and so they don't teach it. In one of our local counties in Tampa, I won't name it, we've been able to find only 3 teachers teaching cybersecurity in a school district that's one of the largest, not just in the state, but in the nation. And so part of this is building a model curriculum that we can export. We've just gotten a grant from something called the National Cryptologic Museum Foundation. For those of you that don't know it, that is the National Security Agency's 501c3 charity. I bet most of you didn't know that NSA had a 501c3, but they do, and they're all in when it comes to K through 12 education. And we're helping them develop a module in that. We've got a cyber summer camp for kids that USS College of Education is putting on. We're trying to organize teachers' academies to teach teachers to make them feel comfortable with this curriculum. And I will tell you that we've identified 4 different elements that have to be incorporated into these programs. Basic cyber hygiene. This is something that kids need to learn in every class, every day. Otherwise, they'll get sloppy. Cyber citizenship. No one knows quite how to do that, but how do you create discerning, rational, thoughtful citizens in today's digital environment? Not an easy thing. That's something we want to take on. Then there are cyber competencies and cyber careers. That's for the kids who have an aptitude for ones and zeros, for analytic methods, for critical thinking. That's a relatively small part of the school-age population, but an important one because that's where the professionals are going to come from. And of course, we're focusing on them as well, in part with the grants that we're working. 2 that I'll mention, both with the National Security Agency. One is to develop a national cybersecurity workforce development model that focuses on veterans and first responders. That's the adult education part, as well as a K through 12 grant and a higher education one that includes a national cyber competition. Think of it as March Madness for cyber ninjas in college that will hone their skills and hopefully identify them to prospective employers. Anyway, that's our education agenda. It is sweeping and it is aggressive. You can get the details from the link. Next slide, Rob, please.
Oops. Yeah, Ron, let's just go through one more slide, and then I want to provide time for some Q&A.
All right. Then why don't we skip to the engagement slide?
Okay.
So research, there you go. There's engagement. So the bumper sticker here, of course, is we want to make Florida the most cyber secure state. Is that just a good thing? No. It brings business. It brings people coming to Florida. It brings businesses to Florida. If they think that Florida has a workforce that can fill their cybersecurity jobs and an educated citizenry that knows how to live life online, then we'll attract them. Part of this is public outreach. I mentioned some of the campaigns that Kate Whitaker is working on that will educate citizens. We've just done a series of workshops for local government officials who, trust me, could barely spell cybersecurity. I think we've taught them enough now to be dangerous, to ask their CIOs and CISOs the kinds of the questions that will make them uncomfortable. Part of this involves working at the state level to get more money, particularly for local governments so they can patch their defenses, and for the state as well. So there's a very aggressive public engagement, community engagement agenda that we have that will reach out and hopefully deal with those pigeons that George Costanza keeps running over, because we think it's partly our responsibility, partly all of ours, but partly Cyber Florida's responsibility to equip our citizens with the kinds of digital skills that will help them survive in a post-COVID-19 cybersecurity world. So I'll get off my soapbox. There are a couple of other slides, including a couple that talk about the technical capabilities that we can bring to bear to support classes, labs, summer camps. We've even done one with the Girl Scouts, and I would direct you to that. But in the interest of time, Rob, as you suggested, I'm happy to shut up now and we can take questions from the floor. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Ron. Yeah, there's again, there are materials you can download on the site. And I'll point you to where you can do that in a moment. And let's see. Okay, and so at this point, what I would like to do is kind of open it up. If anyone has any questions, you can post that to the, there's Alex.
Yep, just wanted to jump in. So there's already a couple questions in the Q&A section. I don't know if you've been keeping an eye on that, Rob, but there's quite a few in there already if you want to just start picking out a couple of those.
Okay. Well, let's see. Okay, so the first question, data privacy and security is becoming in post COVID-19 will become a strategic advantage for businesses. For all panelists, what trends are you seeing among small businesses as they become digital?
Rob, if you don't mind, I'm gonna jump in here, in part because one of the things I just did today was help Kate and others put together a program directed particularly at small and medium-sized businesses when it comes to cybersecurity. I'll go back to something I think John touched on, DoD's new certification standards for anybody who does business with the Defense Department. And we like to think that's a lot of cybersecurity firms, and it is, but it's also a lot of mom and pop operations to include buildings and ground maintenance, catering, et cetera. And I'm here to tell you, those people don't have a clue, and DoD is telling them, if you don't meet our standards, you can't do business with us. So I think what we're going to have to do is teach privacy, data security in high school and in college. I'd like to see it as part of a business degree. I'd like to see the Small Business Administration put out instruction to small business owners, because it's not just a strategic advantage. It's going to be a survival trait. If you can't promise data security and privacy, you're going to find yourself locked out of a lot of markets, DoD being one of them, but plenty of others, as we all learn to survive in this digital world.
Yep, Ron, just so you know, last year we put on a Small Business Cyber Academy, and the two other panelists here with you were integral parts of that. And we actually used modeled it after a curriculum from the University of Texas, San Antonio. So that's actually an asset that we have at Florida Gulf Coast University that you might be able to leverage for, throughout the state.
You may regret telling us that, because I'll consider you all indicted co-conspirators right now.
Okay, government entities, especially local governments, have shown big susceptibility to ransomware and other attacks. Now that local government business is being done online, what's being done?
Well, I'll just stab at that. I think that's actually kind of funny. Government entities are being attacked more frequently. And this goes back to what I was saying earlier about being able to pivot quickly. Government is not, the speed of government is a real thing. Things take a while for change. Things take a while to be adopted. They're in that technology life cycle. 3 to 5 years for a technology life cycle is light years for cyber. You know what I mean? So being able to keep up with those types of attacks is huge for government entities. You know what I mean? So, what's being done? I mean, it's it's a constant cat and mouse game, you know, with the government itself. So it's like trying to figure out ways to bring them up to speed and give them those security technologies. But the problem with a lot of that stuff is a lot of these got to be American made and American born. So a lot of the cyber technologies are coming out of Israel, and a lot of the major changes in technology. And that's why Ron is here, you know, with Cyber Florida, to help bring that stuff back to the US, you know what I mean? And try to give us that competitive technology edge, you know, because I have a lot of vendors now that I deal with that are Israeli, but that's a lot of risk for some companies, you know, itself too. So, you know, what's being done, you know, it's DOD, you know, what Ron said, the DFARS and how it changed, and the adoption of NIST 800-171 and having a way to show how they were maturing, show their system security plans. All that stuff now is being mandated, you know. So DFAR, which is the Defense Federal Acquisition Requisition, is like how you do business. And in that contract stipulates how you have to be. And don't think for a second that this isn't going to get adopted and migrated to the FAR. You know, I really think that this is a baby testing ground. And, you know, DOD has a black eye, a few of them, you know, recently, you know, from contractors and things like that, just from basic hygiene, you know, not doing basic hygiene, you know. So now this is kind of forcing that. And this is kind of, you know, with remote work, you know, now they're going to have to pivot again, because in the CMMC about it, but it doesn't really, you know, force that home.
So Rob, I think it was ironic that when you asked the question, there was silence, because I think that's the answer. Not nearly enough, especially for local governments. Two very quick things, again, in the interest of time. You can find this at our Cyber Florida website link. We did a survey of local governments last year and found they were grossly unprepared for cyber attacks. Not their fault. Do I repair a road or do I hire a CISO? They're literally having to make those difficult choices. We put a legislative proposal together with the League of Cities, the Florida League of Cities, that got to Tallahassee, got through a whole bunch of committees that would have given grant money and technical assistance to local governments. It died at the very 11th hour in the legislature. We're going to try again this year. Write your local representative. We need to get that passed. It's not nearly enough money, but it's a start so that local governments can go get a grant, hire the right people, buy the patches, buy the hardware, and make themselves at least a little bit more cyber secure than they are now. But they're very vulnerable.
Quick mention there, Rob, on the small government deal. One thing I encountered during a weird part of my life when I had an additional job running a small town as town board president was the tendency of town boards to want to lead with the solution, much like the government. Go grab a product because somebody's heard of it or it was wonderful or their cousin works with that firm or something, and not really do some due diligence. So that's the thing I would encourage, along with the basic hygiene kind of things Ron was mentioning earlier, because even the big cities have been caught with their pants down lately, as you notice, by just not doing things that any of us in cyber would have a well duh moment over, like basic backups, basic patching. It's hard to keep up with that across a big network, but for goodness sakes, a small business or small town can do it as simply as a flash drive or a small removable hard drive that suddenly makes them semi-bulletproof, you know, with just some simple practices against these horrible things that have been locking towns up tight because they can't afford the cyber insurance that would help them. And so some of those basic solutions are worth a look before they run out and grab something really, really fancy.
Okay, good. Okay, next question. As we transition thousands of workers from the leisure, hospitality, and retail industries, is there short-term training which will lead to entry-level positions leading to a career in cybersecurity?
I apologize for jumping in again. We've actually explored some of this. I think that's what that NSA grant is intending to do that I mentioned earlier. That is develop something that doesn't require somebody to go back and get a 4-year college degree or a 6-year college degree. Now, I will tell you, and we've done some work with the SANS Institute in this regard, not everybody can convert. You've got to have an aptitude for it, but it doesn't necessarily take a mathematical genius to do this. It takes something with critical thinking skills. who can think analytically, and they can be taught the ones and zeros. But I'm not sure we're there yet. The United Kingdom and, believe it or not, the United Arab Emirates have both done some really groundbreaking work in taking ordinary citizens and making them cyber ninjas. At the University of South Florida, we did an experiment last year with a grant from JP Morgan Chase to convert about 24 or so veterans into cyber ninjas. Again, non-college, these are veterans, all sorts of military occupational specialties, and we made them into cyber network or computer network defense analysts. So it can be done, but it's not been taken to scale, and it needs to be, again, another impetus, I think, from COVID-19.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I have to say something on that too, though. You know, especially like coming from Maryland and where I was at. Maryland has spent a ton of money on cyber too. So, you know, a lot of those local colleges too, like, you know, Anne Arundel Community College, they have a lot of these cyber warrior programs, you know, that actually help educate and get like people ready for CND, for computer network defense, and other jobs, forensics, whatever it is in there. And they actually are really focused on practical skills. You know, and a lot of that's missing in university. You know, it's a lot of policy and procedure and those types of things. All of that is necessary. But when these guys get out in the field, the OJT, the on-the-job training stuff, you know, is really what makes that valuable. And a lot of these programs that I don't know if they're incubating them or trying them, just a lot of those down in Maryland, like where I'm from, and especially they have these labs and things where they actually teach you purple team, you know, blue team exercises, and you actually play with hardware to get that real world experience. And I think that's what's really needed to move that needle. You know, a lot of that stuff that we were talking about earlier about local governments as well, a lot of these people are organically grown. You know, they've grown up in the same organization. You know, they don't have a lot of experience outside of that organization. And I think that puts a lot of these organizations at risk, you know, and not having that true expertise across multiple domains, understanding, you know, the cyber ecosystem as it is now with hybrid IT, those types of things. And I think that's why we see an uptick in all of these different types of attacks, you know, and that sort. So,
okay, good. Well, why don't we do one more question? I think we're at about 7:18, so we're over a little bit, but I'd like to get one last one in. Then I think we'll kind of conclude for the evening. How responsible is the government in establishing comprehensive legislation like GDPR and CCPA, which is California, at the federal level for consumer data as it has done in finance and healthcare?
I can do a quick mention on that just to say that the government now, as always, for probably much of its existence, is wonderfully good at unfunded mandates and legislation. We have a whole industry I'm a part of in compliance for regulated industries doing that. It's coming, I think, for businesses as well, would be my estimation. So they're wonderfully responsive. I'm just not sure I like that you'll like the direction they're responsive in.
Rob, I will say this, and this is something everybody listening, I think, knows. Cybersecurity knows no geographic boundaries. So to do this state by state, unless each state is going to adopt mirror images of their sister states, to do it state by state simply fails to recognize the fact that cybersecurity, cyber attacks are boundless and boundaryless, and the response to them needs to be boundaryless. Now, I don't disagree with Ralph. You have to be careful what you wish for. It's going to take educated legislators and public administrators to make sure that that if it's going to be a federal effort, that it's done right. But I'm not at the risk of making a political statement here. We've seen how a decentralized COVID-19 response can work, and I'm not sure we want to see the same thing for cybersecurity.
Well, gosh, we already have 50 different state laws on privacy and those types of things. So maybe there will be some synergy later on and some consistency, but I think that's well off into the future. But what may drive it is GDPR and maybe in some of the California laws that will force others to adopt or standardize to certain levels. But we'll see. Okay. Well,
I'd like to stress, John, I'm alone and do not represent the University of South Florida.
Okay. Well, I'd like to thank the panelists, Ralph, Ron, and John, and also all the attendees for participating. Let me see if I can get back to where you can download the information. And if we can't get that figured out, you can, let's see, Alex, are you still on? Okay, can you show us how to download the information?
I wouldn't leave you hanging, Rob.
I knew you were there.
So once we close this presentation mode out, there's 3 images around the floor plan. So there is one that has the Southwest Florida Tech logo. It's the upper left-hand corner. If you click on that and scroll down and click download resources, I think is what it says, you'll get to that, that resource guide. You can also, I posted a link earlier in the chat. You can find it there. The 2 other icons are information about Cyber Florida and also about Inceptus. So if you're interested to learn more about either of those organizations, you can just click on there, the icon, and then it will open up a page that you can either watch a video, learn more, or click to link to the website.
Okay, I think we're done.
All right. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the presentation mode. If you want to hang out and network, you're welcome to for a few minutes.